Our first keynote speaker is Dr. Marcos Pelenur. He's Chief Executive of the Energy Efficiency and Conservation Authority. Dr. Marcos Pelenur became Chief Executive of EECA in September 2023. Previously, he worked for Behavioral Insights team in Ottawa, Canada, and served several policy leadership roles at MB. Marcos has a PhD in engineering from the University of Cambridge, and he's a chartered professional member of engineering New Zealand and in the UK. So I'd like you to join me in thanking Marcos for being our first keynote speaker.
You want me to use the mic or not?
Yeah, be good because everyone. So, the lapel.
Okay. Tēnā koutou katoa, no parihi au e noho ana au ki Poneke, e mahi ana o ki te tari tiaki pungao, he tahuhu rangapuhu au ko Pelenur toko inua. I had to do this while doing my mihi before, so always up for the challenge. All right. It is very good to be here. Thank you for inviting me. I am going to talk a little bit about EECA because I think some of you may not be that familiar with what we do, how we fit in the system. I'm then going to zoom out. I want to just talk a little bit about energy and emissions in New Zealand, where I see that going, where the previous trends have been. And then I'm going to zoom in within our kind of structure at EECA and talk a little bit about demand flexibility and the role that that can play to help us in the transition. It will be probably kind of, in hindsight, I think about it, I'm like, oh, this is pretty technical, and I've got an hour, and I'm kicking off the day with a bunch of numbers and slides, so I'm going to just try and interject with some energy to keep us awake this morning. And I also recognize that, and I'll talk a little bit about it as well, the role of people in communities just can't be decoupled from the energy system. And I know we've got some amazing speakers later on that are going to really zoom in to the people side of it. So I thought to start us today, it'll be the big picture, and then we'll go into some of those community and those really important topics as we go through it. I will try my best to leave time for questions, and I will welcome any questions about anything, and if I can answer it, I will, and if I can't, I'll let you know. Okay, that's me. All right, EECA, you may not be that familiar with us. We are small but mighty, and I'm very proud to be sponsoring the Student Awards here as part of the Research Symposium. Our mission is to mobilize New Zealanders to be world leaders in clean and clever energy. That comes from our act to promote and encourage energy efficiency, conservation, and renewables. I've just refreshed the strategy with the new government. There are 3 focus areas for us now as an agency. And I'll talk, and this is just kind of the taster, and then I'll zoom back out. Energy efficiency first, which is not that surprising because that's what we do on the tin. It's getting people to understand the value and make energy efficient choices. The cheapest fuel is the fuel that you don't use. And so we are laser focused on trying to help New Zealand raise its productivity and improve energy intensity through energy efficiency. There's a range of programs that help us with that. Our regulations, our standards, our labeling, case studies, and information. The second focus area is something that we've been doing a little bit implicitly, and I wanted to be very deliberate when I joined EECA, that we are here, at least from the government agency, to punch strongly from the corner of the consumer or the energy user. We want to help energy users make the most of their energy. manage and control and get what they want out of energy use. And I use energy users as slightly clunky language. I wanted it to be empower people. But the reality is that we help people in the residential space, but we also connect with SMEs and connect with commercial and industrial. So hence energy users. So when you think about the different roles of government agencies play, market regulator, policy, I hope that when you think about EECA, you remember that we are here to help energy users. And we do that through our information and engagement campaigns and a lot of the demand flexibility work, which is the core of the presentation today, sits in this space, because I really believe that demand flexibility and demand management is a must-have ingredient for us to do a managed and equitable transition as we electrify. And the third focus area, accelerate renewables. Right? And when I say accelerate renewables, I mean via the demand side. So we don't get involved in like the big power plant stuff in the supply side upstream work. The market will take care of that. But how might we help use low emission fuels or electrify or create the demand that will then pull in renewable supply? So we really think about the demand side. So a lot of the work we do there is around EV chargers, decarbonizing the transport fleet, and actually just coordinating. So we go into regions and we help coordinate between large energy users and low emission fuel suppliers like biomass or electricity. All right. How do we do it? Well, you know, like everything in government, we do it with lots of excitement and passion and interest. And so our three levers in that basket of action are regulation, information, motivation, targeted investment. That's how we work across delivery of our focus areas. So we are a product regulator. We look at the minimum energy performance standards of products, labeling, all that kind of stuff that we take for granted. We run engagement campaigns to help people understand how they can use energy better, how they can make informed choices for themselves. And then we administer and deliver funding programs on behalf of the government. So a lot of our big programs are in that third bucket. Government investment to decarbonize industry, GIDI, which was stopped recently. We've got a program now, though, that is continuing around low emission heavy vehicles and EV chargers. I do enjoy coming to visit Dunedin and the South.
It's about sound.
Okay, you let me know if we're in business. All right, here we go. Just in time for my little anecdote. So yeah, I came to New Zealand about 20 years ago. I had a job for an engineering company doing smart meters and ripple control systems in Auckland. And I was a field engineer, and it was great because they're like, take the company ute and just drive and just do some maintenance checks. And so I spent 2 years as a junior engineer driving around the country doing my maintenance checks, and absolutely loved New Zealand. And I saw every bit of it. My wife's a Kiwi. Our kids are born here, and I'm a Kiwi now. But it is always a pleasure to be able to come down here, and I take almost any excuse to visit. I think if we zoom out, energy has been a very hot topic, right? We cannot, if we just think about a couple of months ago with the spot market and the extremely high prices that was then causing all sorts of pain in all of the media around the mills closing. And you can kind of go into the details about whether it was that event alone that tipped over the apple cart, what was going on. But I think there is no doubt that energy is a critical input into the activities we do in New Zealand. And it touches people's homes, it touches their health and well-being and their warmth and safety, and it touches our large industries and the competitiveness and productivity of those industries. So when we get it wrong, it's a grit in the system. The whole thing just starts to seize. When we get it right, I believe that it is an absolute enabler of prosperity and wealth for New Zealand. And we are very lucky to be endowed with amazing natural resources. And so I'm a big optimist of being able to think about how might we harness that to unlock that prosperity for the country. We look at and think about energy demand. It has been very flat for a number of years, and it is now starting to increase. And alongside the increase of energy demand is the increase in costs of how we will meet that demand. It's expected that since 2021, we've had 2% increase in demand. Last winter was 122 megawatts. And this is a minor point, but it goes to show how I think if we get it wrong, the impacts of that. There was a removal of what's called the regional coincidental peak demand charges, which is kind of part of the transmission TPM, the methodology where it calculates the cost of how you allocate transmission and distribution costs. So that market setting removal, the Electricity Authority estimates contributed to an additional 2.2% national demand on peak. And that on peak demand is where we have to build the power lines up to, even if it's only gets utilized for less than 5% of the year. So whatever we can do to shift peaks and just manage our demand at that time is going to have a significant and substantial impact on the overall cost of the energy system. A modern, affordable, and secure energy system is fundamental. That's the main point of this slide. The government is committed to its net zero targets. It just wants to do it very differently from how it has been done under the previous government. So how are we going to get there? What are the costs that we can try and avoid and manage? So to electrify and to think about how we can make the best use of our resources, estimated going to cost us $42 billion. And when you think about that, what does that actually mean for individual households? Somewhere in the rough estimate of $120 to $240 a year. And for those who are working with communities, that is who are already struggling to pay for their bills, that is a significant increase. For those who are following every single exciting cut and thrust of regulation in the Beehive, you will have noticed the Commerce Commission, ComCom, have just released their DDP4, the default pricing pathways for distribution companies. It's a lot of jargon, but actually it's fundamentally critical to how the lines companies can invest in infrastructure. And they are expecting prices to go up somewhere in the order of 10 to 20% next year for line charges, and then continue to go up. Now, the challenge that I throw down to the sector when I meet with them is that is assuming a BAU kind of worldview. How might we do things differently with demand flexibility? How might we invest in some innovation and shifting to avoid those costs? And that's the conversation that I'm having in Wellington. If I just turn a little bit to emissions, kind of like it's a good and bad picture, right? I think it's bad in the sense that since 1990, we're still about 20% higher, at least from 2022. But we've seen the curve go down. Now, I would say like last year is not going to help. Last year's shortage and the amount of coal that we had to burn for the energy system is going to be pretty serious headwinds for us into reducing emissions. Most of our emissions from energy, 82% of the increase for energy is from transport. So again, I think it is important that we also try and understand which segments are the ones that we should be targeting if we're trying to reduce emissions. So thanks to electrification and the renewable grid, thanks to a lot of rain, and I know it's a bit annoying, particularly in summer, but like may it rain and may snowpacks form, we have been able to reduce our overall emission profile. The challenge is how we now marry that with an increase in demand, right? So as we build out more demand, we need to build more generation, we need to build more lines. How do we support a system that has increasing amounts of variable generation? And how do you firm that generation if you're not going to use coal or gas? Demand flexibility is not the silver bullet. It's not the panacea that's going to save everything, but I think it is a really important critical ingredient. And I just now want to shift to how we might use demand flexibility. So the challenge for us in the last couple of slides are that, yes, energy is improving, emissions are improving, demand is increasing, we've got a green grid, but if we kind of just roll it out as a BAU, it is just going to be billions of dollars of costs. And we think that we can save billions of dollars by doing it in a managed way. So actually just thinking about the future a little bit, and then we're big supporters of research at EECA, and we've got a good set of tools and a good set of programs to support research around New Zealand. This is from our Times model, which is free and accessible online, and it is looking at the future, 2018, 2020, or 2050. And the main takeaway here is that electricity is set to double from about 144 PJs to 270 PJs. That's our estimates. And it's not really so important, the absolute numbers. I think the main takeaway is electricity demand is going to get heaps bigger. And so how do we meet that demand? Where is it coming from? Oh, and I can't even promise you that this is going to be the smallest text graph. There might be more. So keep an eye out for it. But maybe it's like a little teaser to go online and check out the tools yourself, because it's fully accessible and open, and you can query it any way you want. So this is from our energy end use database that was just recently updated. It is a bottom-up approach to understand energy use in Aotearoa. It complements the top-down approach of MB. So we work very closely with the energy modelers at MB. The main takeaway from this slide, which is the orange, the main key point is we still use lots of fossil fuels. There is a lot of opportunity here for us to be able to reduce fossil fuels. Oh, here we go. This is it. This is the one with the smallest text. Don't worry so much about the text. What this is trying to say here is where might the potential be for us to decarbonize our grid? And as I was alluding to, transport. Transport is the segment of the pie that is the most ready to electrify and to reduce emissions. The BCG report estimated that 2 gigawatts of demand flexibility is going to be needed. And if you look at the Electricity Authority's pipeline of new generation, 16 gigawatts of new generation is in the pipeline. It is a lot of build. It is very costly. Who is going to pay for the build? We all are going to pay for the build. That's the spoiler. So how might we think about the energy system in a way that spreads the cost out in a more managed way? Probably also, it's kind of relevant, just take a pause here and think about, this is very traditional economy, right? Dairy, wood, non-dairy agriculture, really important stuff. How do we grow, or as the economy grows to new economy activities, and hopefully New Zealand, it's not a trade-off, it's about growing the pie of prosperity for us. How does that affect energy use? If you think about data centers and the role that we are trying to promote our green grid to produce low emission fuels like green methanol or hydrogen, or trying to attract data centers, how does that energy intensive activity going to look for our emissions profile, and how are we going to feed and meet it? Are really interesting questions to work through. And I think there's some really fascinating reports about, you know, how you think about crypto and AI and data centers and how you feed those activities and the emissions associated with them. Again, I think if we do them well, there's no reason that we can't do them well and support great, you know, the new economy with green energy. If we don't, we're going to be adding fuel to the fire of our problems. So when I think about the value of distributed energy resources, for us, we estimate that we can save, using demand flex, about 7 billion by 2050. So out of that 42 billion, significant amount of money to be saved. That is pure savings that the consumer or the energy user does not have to pay. And 6 billion, nearly 6 billion of that is from the deferred lines and transmission. And that's why I focus so much on the lines as part of it. If we can just push out the builds, we need to build more. Like I'm not sort of, you know, saying keep everything as is or epoxy and just leave it. It's just, how do we do it in a managed way? How do we do it in a way that allows us to optimize the build out? And that is the cause that I champion very strongly back in Wellington. Because we don't have any skin in the game. You know, I don't own any lines companies. I don't own any generation assets. So I like to think that the position we can speak from is a much more objective, third-party view of the system, as opposed to trying to convince an incumbent about a different business model. Yeah, I mean, go for a question now if you want. Yeah. Yeah. Uh, how I think the question was around, how can the government share incentives, or how would you structure the incentives to it is. But can I just unpick the EV one for a second, because I think it's super interesting. It's not so linear that a subsidy increase prices and remove the subsidy, prices have gone down. Because when you go and talk to the car yards and you go and speak, you know, I was speaking to MIA and speaking to the agencies, they don't want to reduce the prices, but they have stock that they can't shift. So it's a market response rather than a subsidy response. And the EV space is a very interesting space to be able, you could spend half an hour trying to understand what has happened with the clean car discount since it's gone on, since it was introduced, since it was removed. And I just think, and this is actually a really good point. I will answer your question, but I just want to reflect that. And I did want to talk about this, because we're about to delve into more and more technical land. I just want to pause, take a breath. Communities and people and the non-financial barriers and drivers that go into decision making are absolutely critical to think about in frame. And I say that I am very happy to be here, because my research was actually based on Janet's body of work here in Otago, and thinking about energy cultures and how in the engineering world we need to take a social, cultural human lens to designing our systems and designing our services. And it is just fundamental that we consider that when we are thinking about all the kind of high-level market settings and the policy settings, because at the end of the day, New Zealand's made up of, I mean, okay, it's made up of animals and trees, but it's society has made up of people, and we need to put people at the center of what we do here. And that cultural frame is actually really important when we think about EVs, because it's not just when people are buying an EV or when they're making a purchase of an energy appliance, they aren't just basing it off a cold and calculated CBA of what is the price alone. There is a whole bunch of basket of factors that go into it. And speaking to the market, people, a lot of it is people see the change in direction and the signals, right or wrongly. They have overemphasized what that means, and then they've made a lot of choices based on that. So when I talk to the car yards and when I talk to the Motor Import Association, people who go on the yards are not asking about, they're not even asking about EVs because like EVs are not a thing anymore. Well, why are EVs not a thing anymore? They list out X, Y, Z, and it's a feeling. A lot of it is a feeling. That's not to say that, not to completely discount the financial incentives, like it's important, but it's not the only, it's not the only driver. Can I go into one more anecdote and then I'll go back to the presentation real quick? My washing machine broke down like years ago. And I'm like, okay, sweet. I love energy efficiency. I'm an engineer. I'm going to like research the heck out of my option set. I'm like, created like a little spreadsheet. I got my top 3 washing machine models, you know, because I wanted to be fair to my partner. And I went to my partner and I said, look, you can choose anything you want out of long as it's in one of these top 3. You got lots of choice, but this is going to be the efficient, you know, best model. And she was like, nah. She's like, I already know what I want. I want what I like, what, you know, my mom has, because I know exactly how to use it and it looks nice and we're going to get that one. And like after a little brief debate, we ended up getting that one. And you know, which if the CEO of the energy efficiency, agency can't convince the partner to, but anyway, life's a balance. And anyway, there was a lot of really good technical reasons not to get it, but we still ended up getting it. And so that just for me reinforces how important these non-financial drivers are. And I think when we think about the incentives here and the market settings, if we don't make it as easy as possible for people to benefit and engage from it, it's not going to happen. And I believe if the benefits don't flow to the energy users, so to the consumers, then I don't think demand flexibility is going to happen. So when I look at some case studies of where it has gone well and where it has gone poorly, I don't want to pick on the Australians. I think they do a lot of good stuff and they try. There's a lot of, they're in South Australia and they are in dangerous places with social license on very basic things like smart meters and demand flexibility because they perceive it as intrusion into their life. And that is, I believe, because they don't have the benefits flowing back down to them. It's kind of like the system doing onto you a centralized control. And when you do that, you get staunch resistance and people ripping out their smart meters and all sorts of behavior that sends us backwards. On the other hand, you look at the UK and you look at what Octopus has managed to do in the UK, a very different context because they had a severe energy crisis with the Ukraine-Russian war and how that impacted gas for them. So they had to go into a very restrictive environment. But Octopus, I think, just really got off the ground in 2016-ish. And now they are the biggest retailer beyond British Gas in the UK or in England. And their whole premise is around demand flexibility, but making it really easy. Something you don't have to think about. Something that's like super easy. You get $1 or you get £1, and it's not overcomplicated. And sometimes I do think we potentially let perfect get in the way of good and try to create the perfect, technically robust system, and then we lose the simplicity. And by losing the simplicity, I think we lose the consumer on that journey. My years of behavioral insights and behavioral science, I helped set up the behavioral insights team in the UK, and I was looking after the sustainability practice for North America and Latin America. And honestly, the silver bullet of behavioral science is just make it as easy as possible for people to do what they want to do. You know, that's the secret sauce. Hopefully that answers your question. Maybe we'll save the rest of the questions for the end of those. I'll run out of time. Okay. All right, let's keep going. Where do we sit in the system? And I will start to now delve into some of the details. Transpower looks after the grid. The EA and ComCom look after market settings. The market. MB looks after strategic policy. We are in the corner of the energy users. And what does that actually mean? What does that actually mean for us? Well, are you ready for the most exciting part of my presentation? Standards and regulations, because this is the giant of energy efficiency that we stand on the shoulders of, and particularly when we think about our energy intensity improvements over the years. You can think about, I think, all the information campaigns about helping people choose energy efficient appliances and thinking about their choices. And I can, if I weigh that up against the effectiveness of minimum energy performance standards and the rising tide of that, the latter is the titan that helps improve performance, improves efficiency. So we regulate about 20 different products covering residential, commercial, industrial use. There's 102 million products sold. It's 108 PJ of energy. It's or saved. We've saved 108 PJ of energy, equivalent of $2.6 billion of national benefit. I'm not kind of fudging. These numbers are from a international standard, how you calculate energy savings from energy regulatory practices. It is the quiet workhorse of delivering for the country. And that's actually why I talk about it, because it's so easy sometimes to go into the big stuff or go into the announcements that are visible, but energy efficiency is invisible. And nobody comes over, nobody invites you to their house to show you their amazing new installation or their super efficient hot water boiler, but you do get invited to go see a new kitchen, right? So energy efficiency is invisible, yet it is just so important for how we use that resource. Don't worry about the right-hand side. Just the focus here is on the shape of the curve. So we are saving heaps of energy, woo! And then all of a sudden, like, oh no, we're not saving that much anymore. And that is an issue. That is the issue for us. And I will spare you the extremely detailed reason for that around secondary legislation and our regulatory system. But the key takeaway here is that the regulatory system is broken for energy efficiency. And the first thing that I said to the Minister of Energy when I spoke to him was, if you can do anything from day one, this is where I would direct your attention, because it just provides savings for everybody in New Zealand. It's an inefficient regulatory system. It's filled with red tape. You can cut right through that. And I am pleased to say that that is now happening. So Cabinet have agreed to amend our act and approve and introduce legislation which will go through readings and be debated and has to go through that process. But all things going well, that will be probably enacted hopefully next year. And that will allow us to keep up to date with standards. So there are some standards that are 9 years old or out of date. So we develop these joint standards with Australia. We don't do things on ourselves here in New Zealand. They will introduce a standard for like a new lighting system. We'll be like, okay, we'll do it. And then we'll be trying to get it implemented. And then they will introduce the next standard for the lighting system, and then we're kind of back at square one. So we get lapped with our standards. It means that has real impacts for us. real impacts are that we're actually growing more inefficient over time. New Zealand, for example, is a dumping ground for inefficient fridges, which use up a lot of power over time. And that is because our standards for fridges have not been able to keep up with the agreed standards that we've developed with Australia. We've not been able to implement it fast enough. So it's a deep bit of the machinery of government, but is actually really critical that we fix it. So I'm really proud to say that we are fixing it, that the government is committed to it. And it's actually one of those things that you probably will forget about as this from the presentation because it's regulations and standards, but it is just so important for the country. Okay, had to make that pitch. Distributed flexibility in consumers. There's no point telling people to buy smart EV chargers right now if they're not going to benefit from smart EV chargers. So I am working very hard to try and put in the market settings with our colleagues at the Electricity Authority and MB so that people can benefit from demand flexibility. In the meantime, we'll use standards and regulations to try and ensure that those products come in connected and smart enabled. But when the time is right, we think engaging with consumers so that they understand how easy it is and the benefits is absolutely vital. So we want to engage and run our information campaigns so people have all of the information they need at their fingertips to make the best choices for themselves. That they adopt smart products and then they actually know how to use them and how to integrate it. That's sort of like the consumer end. If I would just talk about more of the industrial end, we've done a really interesting report with Fortescue, who are a green low-emission fuel company, Australian, very committed to hydrogen, very committed to low-emission fuels. They are trying to look at Marsden Point and how you might use that industrial site to produce synthetic SAF, sustainable aviation fuel, which is a huge opportunity and a problem that we need to try and overcome, particularly in New Zealand. And it's going to be a slow burn, SAF, but it needs to happen. I tried taking the bus from Wellington to Auckland to try and avoid flying. And, and I had this vision of the kind of European experience of like taking the night bus or the night train and like sleeping and then waking up in the CBD and then, going for my like croissant coffee and it'll be all good. It was not that experience. I was advised by the bus driver, or all of the passengers were advised by the bus driver when I boarded not to do any drugs and not to get into any fights. And I thought, well, this is probably not, I can't send my staff on here on these overnighters. We don't have a great substitution in place for our commuting around in New Zealand. And we need to do that because that's a big portion of where the hard to abate emissions are going to come from. So looking at how we might produce synthetic fuel, what was really interesting, what we helped Fortescue with, because they don't need any help around the hydrogen production or the SAF production, is actually how can they use that facility for demand flexibility? So using hydrogen to store energy so that they can flex down their electrolyzers when it's needed and then give back to the system. So the whole research report was around the benefits of demand flexibility. And what we found was significant. $360 million you can defer to the transmission line. And it's a savings of $800 million per year in 2045 if that facility is being fully utilized for flexibility. That's just one site. So sometimes the big stuff can have a material impact. If we're able to decarbonize Huntley, like that is a material impact on our emissions profile. All right, I'm going to start to wrap up. I do want to leave time for questions. And if there are no questions, then I will ask myself questions and answer them. But I will encourage you to ask me and engage, and I'll do the best I can. I do want to talk about Flex Talk. I think it's really interesting. This might dovetail with the research community. We had a Flex Talk 1.0. It was pretty small. We were really trying to understand, again, from the standards point of view, if we are putting in place open communication protocols, because we are very big advocates of open communication protocols, we believe that that should be the standard, so that when you buy something, the consumer has the ultimate choice about how their product is used and connects with. The kind of like nightmare example that I dread and I want to avoid in New Zealand is what's happened in the US with, I think it's Juicebox. It was the biggest EV charger company there, something like 200,000 smart EV chargers. But it was a proprietary platform. And then overnight, Juicebox were like, right, we're done. We're closing up shop. We're leaving. And overnight, those all hundreds of thousands of smart EV chargers went from smart, controllable EV chargers to just dumb chargers because it was on a proprietary platform. So that would be a catastrophic failure, I believe. And it's interesting, and I'm sure Janet will have quite a lot to say about the kind of the smart meter rollout in New Zealand, and reflecting on did we do that as well as we could to unlock the benefits of smart meters? And I would argue no, we didn't. But what are the lessons that we can learn from that so we don't repeat it? So we worked with residential and businesses trying to test out this technology. The main thing, which is why I think it's going to be interesting for the research community, is that we are now doubling into it. So FlexTalk 1 was small. We now want to scale up into the hundreds of houses, and working with the EDBs, working with the flexibility providers, and working with communities, try to really understand the cost and benefits of flexibility so that we can get the evidence, so that the policymakers and the market setting regulators like the Electricity Authority have the confidence to put in place a system to promote demand flexibility. It's a bit chicken and egg. When I go and talk to TransPower and I talk to the EDBs, some of them are pro, but a lot of them are, well, we can't factor this in because it's not reliable and we don't know enough about it. And if we don't know enough about it, how do we overcome that? And that is a problem that I'm trying to help with EECA, is supporting the demonstration of these products and projects. And I think it's a great opportunity for the research community to think about some of the other impacts on the community, some of the more social or cultural or other variables that might not necessarily be on our radar as EECA, because it'll be hundreds of houses in the field doing this. And it'll be retrofitted. It's not just about EVs. It's going to be retrofitted onto hot water cylinders. Everyone's house has a battery already, if we think about hot water cylinders. And if we think about what other discretionary load we have. And I think that's really important. I'm going to emphasize this. I think it's really important because sometimes we get caught up in the demand flexibility conversation around, well, that's only for this end of town, only for people who have solar and EVs. And my next couple of slides are in some ways going to reinforce that. But actually, no. I think if we're going to do this, it needs to have an equity lens to it. We just cannot create a system that those in the best positions benefit the most from. That is just inequitable and not good for society. So how do we unlock benefits for everyone? And I think the hot water cylinder is sort of the key to that, because it is a third of electricity use, give or take, for a house. Most people, if not everyone, has it. So it is a key appliance that can bring benefit to any household. Okay, I'm going to skip the exciting conversation about OpenADR and OCPP as the standards for smart appliances. But yeah, come grab me for coffee if you want to chat technical standards. And I will finish on what I think is the potential at the individual level. And yeah, this is for one segment of the population. But if we think about the opportunity of getting this right at the residential level, the work we did with rewiring Aotearoa shows that for a typical house, uses about 87 kilowatt hours a day. If you have a fully electrified and managed home, that can go down to 27 kilowatt hours. So when we think about the opportunity to try and address hardship, which is a very complex problem that is not just an energy use problem, it's an income problem, it's a household thermal performance issue. There's lots of prongs to that problem. But at least from the energy prong, from the energy angle, if we can help households who are struggling now to better use the energy that they have, I think that will have a material impact on their well-being. And I think when you aggregate it across the whole country, it's going to have a material impact on our energy system. So with that, not so quick canter through my presentation, I'll probably just conclude by summarizing a little bit that, you know, the energy, we've got an abundant amount of renewable electricity potential in New Zealand. We are transitioning to electricity as well as low emission fuels. That is presenting a generation and build challenge. We can do it. We've got the pipeline for builds. We've got the pipeline and experience to put up new power lines. But if we don't do it in a managed way, we are missing a trick. We are missing, we are going to be adding a whole heap of costs to the energy system. So my position, my play here is that through demand flexibility, we can roll out an optimized, efficient, managed build out of our power generation and our distribution lines. And that's at the high level, but when it comes down to the individuals and it comes down to the communities and the households, that will have, if we do it well, it'll have a material impact on their back pocket and it'll help alleviate hardship. If we don't do it well, I fear that we'll lose the social license and people will not buy into it, and then it won't get taken up. So really the opportunity is for us as a sector to lean in and to do some good work in this space. Thank you. Okay. Whew. Questions, comments, anything in the energy space?
We'll start with questions from the floor here and then go to some online questions. Yeah, so if someone can run the mic.
So in the context that Australia approved V2G a week or so ago, and AmiBox bidirectional charger got approved in the last couple of days, and I drove past the Clyde power station spilling water yesterday. I guess my question at a macro level is, what's going to drive the incumbents, the gentailers, to innovate and allow the innovation in that you talked about?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question. And if you talk to the independent retailers or the independent generators, they will have a very strong views about what might need to happen in the incumbent gentailer space to open up for innovation. You know, it's probably out of my side of my scope to be able to comment on how I think the market should get restructured for it. I think what we can do from our side is to ensure that we've got enough competition, or enabling competition for people to come in and disrupt the incumbents, or provide a really good challenge to them. And I think that's in the retail generation space, but I think also from the distribution lines that are monopolies, we need to very strongly encourage them, which ComCom and TransPower are doing, to spend their money and invest in innovation rather than just investing in new lines. And then in the world that the sphere of control that we have at EECA, it's around ensuring that the standards are in place for V2G chargers and ensuring that those can just get rolled out quickly and without any regulatory barriers in New Zealand. And so that's a bit that because it's in the sphere of control I have, that's a bit we were working really hard on. It's just making sure that it's the path for somebody who wants to bring in that kind of kit is just like as easy as possible. The challenge is that, for me, is that we can do as much as we can in the product settings, but if the market settings are not there, then the take-up is not going to be there. So it's kind of like, how do you incentivize the benefits to go back to the consumers who might purchase a V2G? And then you go back into how do you get the gentailers to compete into that space?
Oh, excuse me.
I imagine the gentailers are shivering in their shoes with the idea of everybody going off grid. And I am too, because I believe that we do need to keep the grid national. I'm a remote rural user myself. And therefore, we do want to encourage people to be feeding back into the grid rather than going completely off. And I can't see any other way than that we must force the gentailers to give a decent price per kilowatt going back. At the moment, it might be 8 cents or something, the top price. It's not enough.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yes. And look, I'm pro grid as well. I don't think from a resilience perspective that we are benefited by everyone going off grid. I rather see distributed flexibility, but a connected distributed flexibility. The regulator in this space is the Electricity Authority. So they have the powers to regulate, and they have a work program. They have a pretty big work program, but one of the items that they have committed to is around improving the tariffs that go, the feed-in tariffs that go for distributed generation. Because at the moment, it's not in place there. I sit on the Council of Energy Regulators alongside ComCom and the Electricity Authority. I created a demand flexibility subgroup within that, the regulatory body, because I think the issue is important enough it needs its own subgroup. And I've been pushing it, and the Electricity Authority have committed publicly that looking at the tariff structures for, sometimes it's referred to as symmetrical tariffs, but it's basically just more reflective tariffs of being able to then, recognize the value of distributed generation, and what that value provides to the grid, and then giving people payment according to that value, which is missing at the moment, will get looked at this year.
Saw a really interesting number there, the 5.9 billion in deferred costs from
Conservative, likely conservative.
So we've got a pilot underway with Orion to support community energy activation, and there's 9 community groups going through that pilot. 8 of them are doing projects in the low voltage network that would definitely benefit from understanding what went into that number. It seems to me that the networks are really struggling to put a structure, a value around what this flexibility looks like for them in terms of both design and then how that deferred cost value can be given to these groups or individuals that are involved. So the question there is, how did you get to the 5.9 billion?
Yeah, we got to the 5.9 billion through a lot of really kind of bottom-up modeling. It's I believe in open data. So Gareth, I'd say come and chat to me afterwards, and I can give you the spreadsheets, or I can ask the research team to give you the spreadsheets. And the EDBs, that point with the EDBs is really important. So we participate with the Flex Forum that Stephen was chair of for a while. And, there was a Flex Day recently with the Electricity Networks Association, all the EDBs there. There was a lot of good discussion, Correro there, but really it was like, hey, what are we going to do off the back of this? So now we've created a kind of a group of the bigger ones and the more willing ones, because they have more resources, the counties, the Orions, the Vectors, the PowerCos, to basically just really step into the intention of ComCom to invest into innovation. And so my hope is that if we can work across the country with rolling out these kind of, not even, I'm calling them pilots, but they're much bigger than pilots, with the EDBs being EDB led in partnership, then we will be able to create the evidence base for all the smaller EDBs that might struggle to manage the assets, as well as have to grapple with all the new technology and how demand flexibility fits into their plans.
I might move to some of these questions online because we've got a few here. Tom, sorry, I can't see your last name, but he asks, do you think we should move to a capacity and energy market?
Straight question deserves a straight answer. No. I think, and this is probably, I have to be careful. I'm not an energy economist, so it's not something that I've like delved into for a decade plus. I think I understand the problem the capacity market is trying to address. I get it. I think that there's unintended consequences, and so the risk of getting it wrong is probably greater than the benefit. Would be my take on that.
Okay, so another one from Ronnie Cooper, summarized as, what about the building code?
Yeah. What about the building code? Great. No, good question. And I think you can divide that into existing buildings and new buildings because the new building, and Jan and I were just having a conversation earlier. It's we need to stop doing dumb things. So we need to have a building code that's in place, in planning that is in place to prevent poor decisions, and we need to have it so that it is warm, cozy, efficient by default for new builds. We have the existing built environment that we need to work with, and retrofitting and improving the built environment is absolutely critical. And this is where the insulation comes in and efficient heating comes in. And how might we help the existing building stock? And I think this is where also the kind of retrofitting demand flexibility into hot water cylinders makes a lot of sense. So the building code is really important. Hopefully it continues in the direction of improved efficiency.
Yeah, I think there were a couple of questions which were sort of things along the lines of, what about public transport?
Yeah, I mean, like, I'm pro public transit. Here I take the bus every day to work. Try to commute with it. I guess it's the question that you're trying to solve. Are we trying to solve emissions? Are we trying to solve energy? Because depending on what the question is, you'll get to a different answer on what the role of public transport is. I do think we need to be, we need to be realistic about public transport, because, and here's the secret bullet from my perspective of how to get people on public transport. You can overcome a lot of the challenges of public transport, the kind of like inconvenience or if you make going from A to B faster on public transport than by another mode, people will take public transport. That is like the key. So if you have a dedicated corridor for your buses or your trains, and it can get you to A and B, even if those are packed, people will take them, because getting to A to B faster is what people are actually trying to do. So that's how we would encourage public transport. In most of New Zealand, we don't have congestion that is going to prevent people from getting to A to B very quickly, either through, with a car. So public transport is competing on a battle that it can't win in outside of dense urban areas. So I'm pro public transport, but it's not the solution for all of New Zealand, I think.
Here's one that you might understand better than I do. So just this one here by Aaron. Thanks.
And then we've got a question here next.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Oh, good question. Okay. I can't answer this one. I'm going to say it anyway, so you guys can all hear it. So given EECA's role in demand side management, to what degree does a shift towards a more car-centric planning system and a GPS for transport and national land transport plan that has shifted away from investing in renewable transport impact on the work that you're doing? And that is a fair question. We've got a Minister of Transport and a Minister of Energy. It's the same person wearing two hats. So there is a single person responsible for both portfolios. And he has his priorities for transport, and he has his priorities for energy. And we work within those priorities for the government. Our role is to support the government to deliver its objectives. And so when I think about public transport, or I think about transport objectives, I'll look at them and then I'll try my best to help deliver within our programs, help support those objectives alongside the energy objectives. And the government is committed to net zero. It's committed to doubling renewable generation. It's very strongly focused on security, supply, and affordability. And so within those that's the frame that I use when I think about renewable transport and the role it can play.
Thanks, Marcos. So solar farms, I'm not sure what size means they're outside of the distributed generation network. But anyway, a lot have proceeded without having that tariff or sort of guarantee of price. But yeah, if you can comment on one, if there's a cap to the size of a generator within that tariff framework, and being protected with a kilowatt price, whatever.
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't have the answer off the top of my head. You know, I think if you're a utility grid generator and you are connecting directly to the subtransmission or transmission line, and so therefore it's like a direct wholesale market kind of energy participant player, then those market settings are there for you. Like that works. And we're seeing incredible amounts of utility scale solar getting built out. So that is working well. When you go into the distribution network within the lines, and both at the individual level and at the community level, if you're trying to put solar panels on a community emergency center or a Mirai, how you get value from that if you're not feeding into the wholesale market, that's the tricky bit. I guess the delineation for me is whether you are feeding into the wholesale market as a participant or whether you're trying to self-consume and then trade within a community. That latter part is not well set up. Well, to answer the first part of your question, so yes, that is the tariff that the Electricity Authority, so not I, because it's in their remit, but we're working together. But the Electricity Authority is working on is to try and create a tariff for that. But to answer the second part of your question, I mean, nothing would stop an incumbent from coming in and offering a better deal. It's a market, and so yeah, I don't know. Perhaps the Electricity Authority would have opinions about it. I don't know. I don't know the ins and outs of the code, but I suspect there'd be like anti-competitive regulatory regulations in place to prevent that kind of thing.
Okay, I think we've had a good chance for questions, and Marcos is around for the rest of the symposium. Is that correct?
That is correct. I have to catch a flight this afternoon, but I am around on the panel. I think the 1:30 panel on smart meters.
Okay, great. So if you have any more questions, you can ask them there. And those of you online, I think we've covered off most questions, if not all, but they'll keep coming, I'm sure. So we'll break for morning tea now. And